Hello, Squirrel Squad. No, Miss Lighting's crazy, but whatever. Chapter 9. Oh, Lord, help me. Let it be easy to read and understand, and not a long, long, long one. He entered, vociferating oaths dreadful to hear, and caught me in the act of stowing his son away in the kitchen cupboard. Hareton was impressed with the wholesome terror of encountering either his wild beast's fondness or his madman's rage, for in one he ran a chance of being squeezed and kissed to death, and in the other of being flung into the fire or dashed against the wall, and the poor thing remained perfectly quiet wherever I chose to put him. "There, I've found it out at last," cried Henley, pulling me back by the skin of my neck like a dog. "By heaven and hell, you've sworn between you to murder that child. I know how it is now, that he is always out of my way, but with the help of Satan I shall make you swallow the carving knife, Nellie. You needn't laugh, for I've just crammed Kenneth head downmost in the Black Horse Marsh. And 2 is the same as 1, and I want to kill some of you. I shall have no rest till I do." "But I don't like the carving knife, Mr. Henley," I answered. "It has been cutting red herrings. I'd rather be shot, if you please." "You'd rather be damned," he said. "And so you shall. No law and—" Hang on, what happened? Where did it go? "And no law in England can hinder a man from keeping his house decent, and mine's abominable. Open your mouth." He held the knife in his hand and pushed its point between my teeth, but for my part I was never much afraid of his vulgarities. I spat out and affirmed it tasted detestably. I would not take it on any account. "Oh," said he, releasing me, "I see that hideous little villain is not Hareton. I beg your pardon, Nell. If it be, he deserves flaying alive for not running to welcome me, and for screaming as if I were a goblin. Unnatural cub, come hither. I'll teach thee to impose on a good-hearted, deluded father. Now, don't you think the lad would be handsomer cropped? It makes a dog fiercer, and I love something fierce. Get me a scissors, something fierce and trim besides. It's infernal affection. Devilish conceit it is to cherish our ears. We're asses enough without them. Hush, child, hush. Well then, my darling, dry thy eyes. There's a joy. Kiss me. What? It won't? Kiss me, Hareton. Damn thee, kiss me. By God, as if I would rear such a monster. As sure as I'm living, I'll break the brat's neck." Poor Hareton was squalling and kicking in his father's arms with all his might, and redoubled his yells when he carried him upstairs and lifted him over the banister. I cried out that he would frighten the child into fits, and ran to rescue him. As I reached them, Henley leant forward on the rails to listen to a noise below, almost forgetting what he had in his hands. "Who is that?" he asked, hearing someone approaching the stairs foot. I leant forward for the purpose of signing to Heathcliff, whose step I recognized not to come further, and at the instant when my eye quitted Hareton, he gave a sudden spring, delivered himself from the careless grasp that held him, and fell. There was scarcely time to experience a thrill of horror before we saw that the little wretch was safe. Heathcliff arrived underneath just at the critical moment. By a natural impulse he arrested his descent, and setting him on his feet, looked up to discover the author of the accident, a miser who was parted with a lucky lottery ticket for 5 shillings, and finds next day he has lost in the bargain £5,000. Could not show a blanker countenance than he did on beholding the figure of Mr. Earnshaw above. It expressed, plainer than words could do, the intensest anguish at having made himself the instrument of thwarting his own revenge. Had it been dark, I dare say he would have tried to remedy the mistake by smashing Hareton's skull on the steps, but we've witnessed his salvation, and I was presently below with my precious charge pressed to my heart. Henley descended more leisurely, sobered and abashed. "It's your fault, Ellen," he said. "You should have kept him out of sight. You should have taken him from me. Is he injured anywhere?" "Injured!" I cried angrily. "If he is not killed, he'll be an idiot. Oh, I wonder his mother does not rise from her grave to see how you use him. You're worse than a heathen, treating your own flesh and blood in that manner." He attempted to touch the child who, on finding himself with me, sobbed off his terror directly. At the first finger his father laid on him, however, he shrieked again louder than before and struggled as if he would go into convulsions. "You shall not meddle with him," I continued. "He hates you. They all hate you. That's the truth. A happy family you have, and a pretty state you've come to." "I shall come to a prettier yet, Nellie," laughed the misguided man, recovering his hardness. "At present convey yourself and him away, and hark you, Heathcliff, clear you two quite from my reach and hearing. I wouldn't murder you tonight unless perhaps I set my house on fire, but that's as my fancy goes." While saying this, he took a pint bottle of brandy from the dresser and poured some into a tumbler. "Nay, don't," I entreated. "Mr. Henley, do take warning. Have mercy on this unfortunate boy if you care nothing for yourself." "Anyone will do better for him than I shall," he answered. "Have mercy on your own soul," I said, endeavoring to snatch the glass from his hand. "Not I. On the contrary, I shall have great pleasure in sending it to perdition to punish its maker," exclaimed the blasphemer. "Here's to its hearty damnation." He drank the spirits and impatiently bade us go, terminating his command with a sequel of horrid imprecations too bad to repeat or remember. "It's a pity he cannot kill himself with drink," observed Heathcliff, muttering an echo of curses back when the door was shut. "He's doing his very utmost, but his constitution defies him. Mr. Kenneth says he would wager his mare that he'll outlive any man on this side of Gimmerton, and go to the grave a hoary sinner unless some happy chance out of the common course befall him." I went into the kitchen and sat down to lull my little lamb to sleep. Heathcliff, as I thought, walked through the barn. It turned out afterwards that he only got as far as the other side of the settle when he flung himself on the bench by the wall, removed from the fire, and remained silent. I was rocking Hareton on my knee and humming a song that began, "It was far in the night, and the barnies gright, the mither beneath the moles heard that," when Miss Cathy, who had listened to the hubbub from her room, put her head in and whispered, "Are you alone, Nellie?" "Yes, miss," I replied. She entered, and approaching the hearth, supposing she was going to say something, looked up. The expression of her face seemed disturbed and anxious. Her lips were half asunder, as if she meant to speak, and she drew a breath, but it escaped in a sigh instead of a sentence. I resumed my song, not having forgotten her recent behavior. "Where's Heathcliff?" she said, interrupting me. "About his work in the stable," was my answer. He did not contradict me. Perhaps he had fallen into a doze. There followed another long pause, during which I perceived a drop or two trickle from Catherine's cheek to the flags. Is she sorry for her shameful conduct? I asked myself. That will be a novelty, but she may come to the point, as she will. I shan't help her. No, she felt small trouble regarding any subject save her own concerns. "Oh dear," she cried at last, "I'm very unhappy." "A pity," observed I. "You're hard to please. So many friends and so few cares, and can't make yourself content." "Nellie, will you keep a secret for me?" she pursued, kneeling down by me and lifting her winsome eyes to my face with that sort of look which turns off bad temper even when one has all the right in the world to indulge it. Is it worth keeping? I inquired, less sulkily. Yes, and it worries me, and I must let it out. I want to know what I should do. Today, Edgar Linton has asked me to marry him, and I've given him an answer. Now, before I tell you whether it was a consent or a denial, you tell me which it ought to have been. Really, Miss Catherine, how can I know? I replied. To be sure, considering the exhibition you performed in his presence this afternoon, I might say it would be wise to refuse him, since he asked you after that. He must either be hopelessly stupid or a venturesome fool. If you talk so, I won't tell you any more, she returned peevishly, rising to her feet. I accepted him, Nellie. Be quick and say whether I was wrong. You accepted him? Then what good is it discussing the matter? You have pledged your word and cannot retract. But I say whether I should have done so. Do? She exclaimed in an irritated tone, chafing her hands together and frowning. There are many things to be considered before that question can be answered properly, I said sententiously. First and foremost, do you love Mr. Edgar? Who can help it? Of course I do, she answered. Then I put her through the following catechism. For a girl of 22, it was not injudicious. Why do you love him, Miss Cathy? Nonsense, I do, that's sufficient. By no means, you must say why. Well, because he's handsome and pleasant to be with. Bad, was my commentary. And because he's young and cheerful. Bad still. And because he loves me. Indifferent, coming there. And he will be rich, and I shall like to be the greatest woman of the neighborhood, and I shall be proud of having such a husband. Worst of all, and now say how you love him. As everybody loves. You're silly, Nellie. Not at all. Answer. I love the ground under his feet and the air over his head and everything he touches and every word he says. I love all his looks and actions and him entirely and altogether. There now. And why? Nay, you are making a jest of it. It's exceedingly ill-natured. It's no jest to me. And the young lady, scowling, and turned her face to the fire. I'm very far from jesting, Miss Catherine, I replied. You love Mr. Edgar because he's handsome and young and cheerful and rich and loves you. The last, however, goes for nothing. You would love him without that, probably, and with it you wouldn't, unless he possessed the four former attractions. No, to be sure not. I should only pity him, hate him, perhaps, if he were ugly and a clown. But there are several other handsome, rich young men in the world, handsomer, possibly, and richer than he is. What should hinder you from loving them? If there be any, they are out of my way. I've seen none since Edgar. You may see some, and he won't always be handsome and young, and he may not always be rich. He is now, and I have only to do with the present. I wish you would speak rationally. Well, that settles it. If you have only to do with the present, marry Mr. Linton. I don't want your permission for that. I shall marry him, and yet you have not told me whether I'm right. Perfectly right, if people be right to marry only for the present. And now let us hear what you are unhappy about. Your brother will be pleased. The old school lady and gentleman will not object, I think. You will escape from a disorderly, comfortless home into a wealthy, respectable one. And you love Edgar, and Edgar loves you. All seems smooth and easy. Where's the obstacle? Here and here, replied Catherine, striking one hand on the forehead and the other on her breast. In whichever place the soul lives, in my soul and in my heart, I'm convinced I'm wrong. That's very strange. I cannot make it out. It's my secret, but if you will not mock at me, I'll explain it. I can't do it distinctly, but I'll give you a feeling of how I feel. She seated herself by me again. Her countenance grew sadder and graver, and her clasped hands trembled. "Nellie, do you never dream queer dreams?" she said suddenly after some minutes' reflection. "Yes, now and then," I answered. "And so do I. I've dreamt in my life dreams that have stayed with me ever after and changed my ideas. They've gone through and through me like wine through water and altered the color of my mind, and this is one. I'm going to tell it, but take care not to smile at any part of it." "Oh, don't, Miss Catherine," I cried. "We're dismal enough without conjuring up ghosts and visions to perplex us. Come, come, be merry and like yourself. Look at little Hareton. He's dreaming nothing dreary. How sweetly he smiles in his sleep. Yes, and how sweetly his father curses in his solitude. You remember him, I dare say, when he was just another, as that chubby thing, nearly as young and innocent. However, Nellie, I shall oblige you to listen. It's not long, and I've no power to marry tonight." "I won't hear it, I won't hear it," I repeated hastily. I was superstitious about dreams then, and still am, and Catherine had an unusual gloom in her aspect that made me dread something from which I might shape a prophecy and foresee a fearful catastrophe. She was vexed, but she did not proceed, apparently taking up another subject. She recommenced in a short time. "If I were in heaven, Nellie, I should be extremely miserable." "Because you are not fit to go there," I answered. "All sinners would be miserable in heaven." "But it's not for that. I dreamt once that I was there. I tell you I won't hearken to your dreams, Miss Catherine." "I'll go to bed," I interrupted again. She laughed and held me down, for I made a motion to leave my chair. "This is nothing," cried her. "I was only going to say that heaven did not seem to be my home, and I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth, and the angels were so angry that they flung me out into the middle of the heath on top of Wuthering Heights, where I woke up sobbing for joy. That will do to explain my secret as well as the other. I've no more business to marry Edgar Linton than I have to be in heaven. And if the wicked man in there had not brought Heathcliff so low, I shouldn't have thought of it. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him, and that not because he's handsome, Nellie, because he's more myself than I am. Well, whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. And Linton is as different as a moonbeam from lightning or frost from fire." Ere this speech ended, I became sensible of Heathcliff's presence. Having noticed a slight movement, I turned my head and saw him rise from the bench and steal out noiselessly. He had listened till he heard Catherine say it would degrade her to marry him, and then he stayed to hear no further. My companion, sitting on the ground, was prevented by the back of the settle from remarking his presence or departure, but I startled and bade her hush. "Why?" she asked, gazing nervously round. "Joseph is here," I answered, catching opportunity the roll of his cartwheels up the road, "and Heathcliff will come in with him. I'm not sure whether he were not at the door this moment." "Oh, he couldn't overhear me at the door," said she. "Give me Hareton whilst you get supper, and then it is ready ask me to sup with you. I want to cheat my uncomfortable conscience and be convinced that Heathcliff has no notion to these things. He has not, has he? He does not know what being in love is." "I see no reason that he should not know as well as you," I returned. "And if you are his choice, he'll be the most unfortunate creature that ever was born." And guys, I'm going to have to stop right there. I'm sorry, I just can't get through it, but it's not too bad. getting better. See you later. Love ya. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Live at 5 today. See ya. Bye-bye.